It's been said that every quilt tells a story, and it's so true. But I also believe every quilter has a story to tell. I wanted to hear about the people behind these wonderful quilts and thought you'd enjoy hearing about their lives also. Welcome to A Quilter's Life. I've always been amazed by whole cloth quilting, but Karlee Porter has taken it to a whole new level. She's developed graffiti quilting, which is a very unique technique that encompasses a copious amount of quilting designs. 10 years ago, Karlee wrote a book to share this technique with others, and quilters fell in love with it. Graffiti quilting has grown so much that Karlee updated her book and her class to offer her students to not only make quilts be more beautiful with each traditional rule that is broken, but with each new design combination, they learn skills that will skyrocket as they build the muscle memory to execute all the free motion quilting visions. Karlee, I am so thankful that you are on A Quilter's Life today. I'm anxious to hear your story.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to chat.
How did you find out about A Quilter's Life?
I have gotten kind of deep into lots of different podcasts over the years, and sometimes I feel like I just need to kind of clean out my system and start fresh. And so I had just posted on my social media, okay, tell me your favorite quilting podcast. And your podcast was named so many times. So I was like, oh, how have I been missing this?
It's amazing how the algorithms work sometimes.
Yeah, it sure is. But I'm very happy to have found you. So I've been enjoying what I've listened to so far.
Oh, great. And I'm so happy you found it. Tell us about where you were born and raised.
So I am a Utah native. I was born and raised in northern Utah in a city called Ogden, just outside, about a half hour north of Salt Lake City. So born and raised there. And now I live about 10 minutes west of Ogden, and I'll probably die here. And I'm totally fine with that.
How about a special childhood memory?
Oh, man. So being raised in Utah, it's kind of like the outdoorsman's dream. We like to joke that you can go golfing and skiing in the same day in Utah, which is pretty true. I mean, it's not every day of the year, but it has happened often that people have been able to do that because the weather is so silly here. But I think some of my favorite childhood memories, I'm more of a summer gal. And so we spent a lot of our summers driving up Ogden Canyon and to the Ogden Valley and going boating and swimming at Pineview. So I think a lot of my childhood memories all stem from being outdoors somewhere and preferably in water.
I heard boat and water. Do you ski?
I actually don't ski very much. I mean, I've never actually snow skied or snowboarded, but I really love to wakeboard. So I'm more of a board sport type girl. I like to skateboard and longboard and wakeboard and those kind of things, or just put me on the back of a jet ski and I'll be happy.
Besides quilting, over the years, have you had other employment?
I did. I started working when I was probably 12 or 13 years old, just kind of like odd jobs, like dog walking and babysitting and housekeeping and nannying. And then I worked at an ice cream shop, and then I worked at a Mexican restaurant. I worked at a call center. So I kind of was like a jack of all trades and absolutely entry level at them, master of none of them. And then after I graduated high school, that was when I kind of got into the quilting world. So lots of jobs. I think I got a good sense of work ethic even before I had any sort of like career in place of what I wanted to do. But kind of more interestingly than working like at the restaurant or the ice cream shop is I've always kind of had this entrepreneurial bone in my body. And so a lot of the things that I did to earn money were like little businesses that I started myself. Like I remember going to the office supply store and buying mechanical pencils in bulk and then just taking them to school and selling them for 25 cents a piece and making a profit. And so that was like my first intro into, oh, you can buy something low and sell it high and make a profit. And then when I got into high school, my aunt taught me how to make homemade caramels. And so when I was in high school, I would make huge batches of homemade caramels and take those to school and sell them for 25 cents a piece. And I ended up making enough money to like pay for my cell phone bill and my car payment when I bought my first car. And so my work ethic has definitely been kind of all across the board of working in a lot of different areas where it was much less about what I was doing and more just about learning how to have a good, strong work ethic and learning about business acumen, how to be a salesperson, how to do customer service, how to fulfill orders, how to source materials, and those kind of things.
Did the kids at school try to barter with you?
A little bit, but it's kind of funny because I grew up in a neighborhood where we were kind of like the poorest of the rich kids and the richest of the poor kids. Like I was kind of right in the middle. I went to an inner city junior high or middle school. And then when I got into high school, that's when like my neighborhood combined with a more affluent neighborhood. And so when I got into high school, a lot of my friends who I became friends with in high school, they just were happy to just buy my goods and services. So another thing that was kind of fun with that, like being a business person in high school, is that I was also kind of known as the customizer type person for merchandise. I would do art on people's backpacks and on their binders and on their folders and on their sweaters and make custom posters of their favorite musicians and earn money that way. So I don't know, it was kind of fun. I had my first little booth just out of my locker, and I would kind of just sell stuff out of my locker between classes.
Now, you mentioned you live about 10 minutes away from where you were raised. Did you always stay within that little bit of a radius, or did you move away and then come back to there?
No, I've always stayed pretty close to home. I got married right after I graduated high school, and my husband grew up about 25 minutes away from where I grew up. And so we kind of just met in the middle when we bought our first house. I have had the luxury of being able to travel quite a bit. I've been across the world, but home has always been very close for me. So I haven't had a lot of motivation to live far away from where I was raised. I was more motivated to just find the perfect house that was like the exact floor plan and layout and space where I could have a studio. And that just happened to be close to home.
Well, not everyone has the opportunity to be close to family like that. So that's really precious.
Yeah.
Karlee, is there anything else about family you wanted to share?
I guess my current family situation, I've been married almost 15 years and I have three adorable sons. I have a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old and an 18-month-old. I am number 7 out of 8 children, and there's 6 girls and 2 boys in my siblinghood. And so I never really expected to have only sons. I guess I always thought that I would have daughters, but here we are. So that's what my family looks like now. And I'm kind of really, really loving being a boy mom. I'm learning that the roughness around my edges that has always been a part of me has lended itself really well to raising fun, rambunctious, strong little boys.
Enjoy. They grow up so fast. I bet you hear that a lot.
I do.
If you had the opportunity to talk to your great, great, great grandchildren, how would you describe yourself to them? And then what would you want to say to them?
Oh man, that's an interesting question. I haven't really thought about that. I have thought a lot about what I would say if I could talk to my great 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 grandmother. So that's an interesting switch to think about talking to my posterity. It's kind of interesting because I think when my husband and we keep a journal together, like a digital journal where we take turns writing journal entries about what's going on with our family. So it's kind of cool to think of that as being a way to be able to talk to my great grandchildren, hoping that they'll have a chance to read the words that we write because we're documenting things. So I guess the answer to that question would be when I think about what I typically write about in my journal. Those are the things that I would want them to know. So I don't know. I mean, I talk a lot about family and about growth and relationships and spirituality and development. And I talk a lot about business and things that I'm passionate about with business practices, and try to show or describe the way that I am trying to be in partnership with my spouse to build a good life for our kids, which will hopefully trickle down to our great grandkids. So I don't know. I guess I would want them to know that they can do anything they want to do. That while our ancestry is an important link in understanding who we are, it's also not the thing that defines who we are. And that hopefully they can be whoever they want to be as one single link in a chain of ancestry, and that they're important and that they're valued and that they're unique as themselves. So I don't know. It's an interesting question to think more about. I'm going to have to think deeper on that. And maybe I'll have to write a letter in my journal specifically to my great grandchildren. That's a good prompt to think about.
Oh, neat. We happen to have a letter from my husband's great grandmother, and she wrote it to her descendants.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah. So that's kind of fun. Also, besides quilting, are there other crafts you do or you have done?
I don't even know if I would call them crafts, because they're so far from what you'd consider crafts. Because I mean, I've done lots of different crafts. I've done ceramics and cross stitching and beadwork and stained glass, lots of those things. But I would say some of my other hobbies that I could call crafts are cooking. I love cooking. I love learning new recipes. I love trying new foods, and also dog grooming. I have a mini poodle, and her name's Lola, and she's a white mini poodle. And it is so fun to give her crazy fun grooming styles, like cutting her hair fun ways. And I bought dog brand hair dye so that I can make her rainbow. And if my 10-year-old self could see me having a rainbow dog, she would just die. So those are two kind of crafts that I really enjoy on the regular. But with more traditional crafting, I would say once I started quilting, I've been kind of stuck on quilting, and it's held my attention for almost 15 years now.
My kids had dogs in 4-H and learned dog obedience with them. Do you do anything like that?
That is so fun. I feel like in another life, I would be a dog trainer. So that's one thing I love about my dog. She's a mini poodle, so she's the perfect size. She's the size of a toddler, like a small toddler. She has hair instead of fur, so I can groom it regularly. She's white, and so it's like a blank canvas for making her fun colors with the hair dye. And poodles are crazy smart. And so she's really, really easy to train. So that's a lot of fun. So dog training is another thing that I feel like I could talk endlessly about. I find it so interesting and so cool. I'm the kind of person that when I see dog videos, like the videos of soldiers coming home to their dogs, I just openly weep. It just touches my heart. Or I remember one time I was watching this video on YouTube, and it was about a border collie who had beat her personal record for the agility course that she was doing. And it made me cry when I watched it because I was so proud of her. So I'm really cheesy. People are oh, I'm a cat person, I'm a dog person. I am a hardcore dog person. So I love my dog. If I could have more, I would. If I could breed dogs, I would. If I could train them, I would. If I could work with police canine dogs or search and rescue dogs or do agility, I could do it all. So in another life, if quilting and art wasn't all consuming for me, anything with dogs would be a very close second, except for probably grooming professionally, just because it seems not fun. I groom my own dog and I enjoy it because she's my dog, but I actually wouldn't want to groom other people's dogs. It's a good skill to learn, I think, for dog owners. I think if you're going to own a dog, you should know how to groom it and you should know how to train it. Even if you don't do those things, I think that just means you're a good dog owner. And if you don't, I will judge you. So don't come at me. But if you have a dog and it's not trained or groomed properly, then you shouldn't have a dog. So I guess that might be my controversial opinion in this podcast. If that's the most controversial thing I say, then that's probably a good thing.
Uh, Do your hobbies or other crafts show up in your quilting?
I think it would actually be the opposite. I think that my quilting really informs lots of other areas of my life. It's more that being an artist influences all the other areas of my life, and it just happens to be quilting. I think like when I'm cooking, I like to make the food taste good, but I also like it to be beautiful. And I think that's very much from the artistic side of my brain to like want something functional and want something beautiful. And that's, I think, why I love quilting so much is because when I would do other crafts, like pottery is a good example as well, because it's something beautiful and also functional. But like when I've done like watercolor painting or oil painting or stained glass or I don't know, things that are more like decorative, I always kind of felt like there was a little bit of a void for me of it being like, okay, but this is just a pretty thing. And what I love about quilting is that it's like, this is a functional thing that is beautiful, or this is a beautiful thing that's also useful. And I really love that. So I find that my quilting pops up into my daily life more often than my other hobbies pop into quilting. So, like, for instance, with working on my new graffiti quilting book that I'm publishing later this year, I took some of my favorite quilts and I took them down to Lake Powell and I like taped them to the side of the rock cliff to take photos of them. So it was like taking them to my happy special places and including quilting in that, because quilting just kind of bleeds into my happy memories, my happy life everywhere else. So yeah, I would say it's about the exact opposite, where I look at something out in the real world and one of my first reactions is like, oh, that would make an amazing quilt. So it's kind of backwards in that way.
Yeah, and they all work together, don't they?
Yeah, definitely.
Tell us about who introduced you to quilting.
So I had kind of a birth into quilting and then a rebirth, if you will. So when I was young, my mom and my aunt and their friends and my grandma, they all had experience with sewing. They were all really good, like garment sewists, and they dabbled in patchwork quilting as well. But for me, my introduction into like the actual quilt making process of a top and batting and a backing being stitched together was when they would come together and they would push all the couches to the side of the wall and put up the 2x4 frame, and we would tie quilts with yarn. So that was like my first introduction into like, oh, okay, this is a quilt. It has 3 layers and it's tied together, right? And then later on, when my oldest sister got married, my mom made her a quilt for her wedding, and it was a rag quilt. So it was like there was no batting in the middle, and it was just 2 pieces of fabric sewn together. And then the seam allowance was like snipped into little 1-inch snips, and then you throw it in the washing machine and it would fray. And so then I was like, oh, this is a quilt. Okay, this is quilting. And that was kind of my extent of it. So I had dabbled in learning how to use a sewing machine a little bit. I made more bean bags than I can count. And that was kind of my extent of knowing how to use a sewing machine. And then right after I got married, I was looking for a full-time job. My husband was going to pursue school to be a programmer, and I was not a school person. So by the time it was time for me to go to college, I was like, no, thanks. I don't want to do school anymore. I wanted to keep on nursing the entrepreneurial spirit that I had. And I thought, okay, I need to at least just get a full-time job, something with good healthcare, so that I can help support my husband through school. And he was also working full-time as well. So I was like, I'm ready to just get to the grindstone and find a full-time job. I had never had a full-time, like 8 to 5 job. So I put out my resume to anywhere within 50 miles of where I live, just thinking, okay, the requirements are I want to work 40 hours a week. I want something that has good health insurance, and I want like a big girl job. So I put out my resume and I got a call from a manufacturing company that was just outside of Salt Lake City. And they called and said, hey, we see your resume. We see that you've worked at an ice cream shop and you've worked at a Mexican restaurant. So you're qualified for an entry-level position with us. I was like, okay, tell me more. So they're like, well, basically you would be building like electronic and mechanical components for heavy machinery. I was like, okay, I can do that. So I go to the interview and they ask me all the run of the mill questions like, what's your availability? When can you start? Like, are you one step up from a trained monkey? All those sort of things that an entry level job needed for a fresh out of high school, no additional experience type person. And I fit right into that. I was not overqualified and I was not underqualified. And so they took me on a tour of this manufacturing company. And when I got into like the production area, there was like a table where this guy was building subcomponents, and then another table where a guy was like putting mechanics together. And then there was a lady wearing like one of those anti-static jackets, and she was like soldering circuit boards. And I was like, okay, like this seems cool. It's like Lego. It's like crafty. Like I've done beads and I've sewn buttons on the stuff. Like I can work with my hands. And then I behold what the actual machinery is that we're building and testing, and it's a quilting machine. And this is my first time ever seeing a legit quilting machine. So the company is Handy Quilter. They just happen to be within 50 miles of where I was born and raised, and they were looking for someone who could work full time in their production department. And so for the first about 7 or 8 months that I worked there, the first position that they have you do is called sew off, which is where you learn how to set up a machine and how to stitch through all of these different patterns to test all of the different functions of the machine to make sure that it works. So for the first 8 months, I was getting paid to learn how to run a quilting machine for 40 hours a week, which is like so opposite from people who learn how to quilt. Typically, they're paying someone to teach them. I was getting paid to do it, which was so cool. And then after that, I moved to different departments. Like I learned the electronics, how to program the circuit board, how to put together like a drivetrain assembly, how to put together mechanics assemblies. I learned how to like package them for shipping. And so over the course of about 5.5 years that I worked there, I did everything from production to mechanics, to electronics, to bobbin winders, to frame assembly, to shipping, to receiving, to inventory. And then finally, when I left, I was their alpha tester with their development team. So I got to test all of the new products that were being developed. So that's as far as I made it. And then when I started doing more of my own design work and stuff, I was like, okay, well, I guess it's time for me to, fly the coop or jump out of the nest or however you want to put it and kind of do my own thing. So it was a lot of fun because I was able to kind of see how the sausage is made and really kind of appreciate and understand the quilting machine, this amazing, incredible tool that is at my fingertips. And the only thing that I didn't really do when I worked there was actual teaching or any like creative artistic stuff. So I was able to do that in my own business when I launched and decided to become an independent designer.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a wonderful perspective that gives you.
Yeah, it was incredible. I kind of worked backwards in a lot of ways. Like I learned how to run a quilting machine before I really learned how to piece a quilt top. And so for me, out of the entire quilt making process, the quilting, I think, will always be the closest to my heart because it's A, the thing I'm best at, and B, the thing that when I fell in love with quilting, this was the part that I fell head over heels for, was the actual free motion quilting, which was really, really cool, but very backwards again.
Well, I might be jumping ahead here, but I saw what you've done with whole cloth quilting, and it's just amazing.
Thank you.
And now it makes more sense.
Yeah, I think for me, piecing has always been and still kind of is a means to an end to get to the quilting machine. And it's like no shade to piecing. It's just my journey was just different. For me, the part that I love the most is expressing myself through the design work of the free motion quilting. And so it's very evident in my quilts that the quilting is like the star of the show because it's the part that I love the most and it's the part that I'm best at. And so most of my quilts are whole cloth quilts because I would rather exhibit my skills in quilting form instead of piecing form because my piecing skills are not worth exhibiting.
So talking about your quilts, do you happen to have a favorite quilt?
Oh, that's really tough. Can I say my top three? Because
Sure.
I don't know if I can just narrow it down to one. Okay, so I would say my top three in the order that they were created. They're my top three equally. Like I can't pick an actual favorite, so I'll just say them in chronological order. So the first one I made in 2012, and it's called Shimmering Symphony. And that one is one of my favorites because it kind of really put me on the map as a quilter who's kind of worth her salt in free motion quilting. It won first place in Houston. It won a $10,000 prize. I'm very, very proud of it. And it's kind of the quilt that really just put me on the map. The second one I would say is just called Mini Graffiti Quilt. And it's the quilt that was on the cover of my first graffiti quilting book. And that was in 2014. And that quilt is very, very sentimental to me because it was kind of the first graffiti quilting composition that I finished where I realized that there was more here than just like me doodling on fabric. Like it was like, oh my gosh, there's actually like rhyme and reason. And I could like put vocabulary to what I had done. So that was a huge, huge kind of breaking point for me as an artist was when I finished that quilt. And then the third one I made in 2017, and it's called the Royal Huntress. And I love this quilt. It's one of the biggest quilts I've ever made. It has the most crystals and beads on it that I've ever done. This quilt stretched me in a lot of ways, and it really pushed the limits of the technology that we have at our fingertips with quilting. And it's like a showstopper. It's so beautiful. It's just gorgeous and brightly colored. It's one of my favorites too. I actually made a cool YouTube video about that quilt. So if you go to YouTube and just search The Royal Huntress by Karlee Porter, you can see the whole step-by-step process of how I made that quilt. So those are my top three favorites, and I cannot narrow it down any further.
Well, you do such beautiful work that I'm sure they all are your favorite.
Thank you. I mean, not true, but the cool thing about like social media is that I only show people the ones that I'm really proud of. So all of the garbage stuff or all of the practice pieces, they exist and they are not great, but nobody knows about them because I'm too prideful to show them very often.
I'm wondering, does Handy Quilter use many tools with the quilting machine, or is it just the quilting machine?
Honestly, if I were going to answer the question, what is my favorite tool? I would say that my quilting machine is my favorite tool. Like I totally consider that just a big, heavy, expensive notion. But I think when it's rounded out in my studio of all of the tools that I have at my disposal, I would say that definitely my favorite is my quilting machine. So I have a stand-up quilting machine and a sit-down quilting machine and a domestic sewing machine that allows me to free motion quilt. And I think just being able to do machine quilting instead of hand quilting is huge. And so that's a big part of it being one of my favorite tools is that it's the tool that allows me to get what's in my brain onto fabric the fastest and the most accurately. I love technology. I love trying out lots of different types of methods for art. And I'm not afraid to explore and try something new and try something wacky. And the thing that I love about my quilting machine is that I can kind of really push it to its limits and see what it's capable of. And so, yeah, I think that's my favorite tool.
Yeah, it's still a tool.
Mm-hmm.
With so many steps in our quilting process, do you look forward to one step? And I'm sure it's the quilting if you do. Or do you like the whole process?
I love the whole process. And some more than others. Like the way that I see it is like some of the process is optional. So like for me, the design work is not optional, right? Like that's what the quilting for me is the design work. Piecing, however, that can be totally optional. I do enjoy piecing here and there, and I'm not like sticking my nose up at people who love piecing or who are good at it. Like I can totally respect it. It's just not something that I enjoy as much, and that's fine. So a lot of my quilts, I skip the piecing altogether because I can still have a finished quilt that isn't pieced, i.e. whole cloth quilting, right? So the quilting is absolutely my favorite part. And then binding, honestly, at least the way that I bind, I know that binding can be a very beautiful art form. I think of people like Beth Ann Namesh, who like makes the most beautiful binding on the planet. Like I have not seen more beautiful binding than Beth Ann's. But I personally am like, this is a means to an end so that my quilt just doesn't come apart. And so I don't hate it, but I don't like have any sort of like love for it. I feel like I'm building more of a sense of appreciation for binding because I love the end result. I love the way that it looks at the end, but the actual process is like, okay, cool. Like the binding's like putting it in a frame. So anyways, that's not that you even asked what my least favorite is, but but yeah, I think the quilting is absolutely for me where the magic happens. It's so magical. And I think even just like the piecing of a quilt top, as wonderful and beautiful as it is, it's still not finished until it's quilted. But then the person who loves binding could easily argue, no, it's not actually finished until it's bound. So I'm totally biased and it's okay. Like I can totally look in the mirror and be like, yeah, you're biased. But yeah, I'm biased to quilting and I'm not sorry about it.
Share your worst quilting experience.
Oh my gosh, I feel like I have so many. I would say like the worst experiences I have is when so there's this really, really awesome YouTube video that I watch very often. And it's like a kinetic typography video of Ira Glass talking about the creative process. You should really look it up because I'm going to paraphrase it and not do it justice. In fact, maybe I'll leave out kind of the bulk of it because I wish that I could re-experience this video with new eyes every time. You know, like when you have a really great book and you wish you could read it again for the first time. That's how I feel about this YouTube video of Ira Glass talking. Anyways, when you watch the video, it'll make more sense. But I think for me, my best experiences with quilting are when the thing that's in my brain successfully translates to the visual piece of art that I'm trying to create. And so the opposite of that, having my worst quilting experiences are when I feel like I know in my bones and in my heart what I want something to look like or how I want it to feel. And the execution falls short from my vision. I think that's when I feel the most frustrated with my quilting experience. I sound like a kind of whiny artist about it. Really, that's for me what kind of drives me and pushes me to say, like, okay, this wasn't a good experience, but because of it, I know how to improve and I know how to excel later. And I do have to say that the more I practice, the more that I have kind of tried to train myself in my craft, the less frequent those bad experiences happen.
That gives me a lot of hope.
Oh, good.
I get to certain points and I think, okay, I'll count this again as learning experience.
Yeah. And that's a really good way to look at it because even your successful quilts are still learning experiences, just like your unsuccessful executed quilts. They all teach us something.
Yeah, they do. Earlier, when we were talking about your hobbies, and you have so many things you would like to do, but you have chosen quilting. Why do you think you quilt rather than do anything else that you could do?
So I think for me, it's kind of like this Venn diagram in my brain that quilting for me falls right in the middle of two things. So I think the first one is that I love it and I enjoy it and I'm good at it. And then the second thing is that I want to have a career. And so because I've been able to have a financially successful career out of quilting, and it's also something that I love to do, there's no reason for me to not do it. I can't think of any things that are better suited for me to fulfill as a career in my life than something artistic. I always knew from a very young age, I knew that whatever I did, it would be something very creative and very artistic and very like heavy in visual arts, whether it was graphic design or video editing or photography. I always knew that there was going to be something creative in my bones coming out. And so when I fell into quilting, well, maybe it wasn't like a fall into quilting. It was more like jumping into the deep end of quilting. It was a very deliberate decision to take this step into the quilting world with my artistic skills. It's not like a void, but I would say like it's almost like if your heart or your soul is like a card catalog and there's all these different compartments, right? Like, so for me, it's like, I love cooking. I love eating. I love dogs. I love playing with dogs. I love snuggling puppies. Like there's all these compartments. And then there was like a whole row of compartments that were like, I love color. I love fabric. I love design. I love piecing. I love working with my hands. I love something functional. I love making gifts and giving them to people. Working as a quilter filled up so many of those drawers in my soul's card catalog that even after being in the industry for 15 years, I always knew I would be an artist. And I've always known that I will continue to be an artist wherever that leads me. And quilting has just held my attention. And I don't have any immediate plans to go anywhere. So maybe that's like a weird way of putting it. Like, I don't want it to seem like, oh, well, there's nothing better that came along. Because really, that's true. But it's because like quilting is amazing. How could I possibly find something better than quilting and sewing and functional art? I have yet to find anything better. So that's why I love it so much. I continually come back to it.
I love how quilting just grabs some people and that's what they have to do. That's what you have to do. It's just part of you. But then there's the other person that they make a quilt and they're done. It doesn't grab them, but I think that's the rare person. Or is it just that I get to talk to all these wonderful quilters?
Well, it's kind of interesting because I think it's a little bit of both. Like, I think there are a lot of quilters, there's lots of us. But then in comparison to the rest of the world, we are very few and far between. And so it's like to be able to kind of find your tribe within this art form is really such a valuable blessing. It's a valuable blessing to have a kinship with other people that's based on a mutual love for this thing, especially when it's like, oh, okay, it's just an inanimate object. But I feel like a quilt is so many things to so many people. And to be able to feel and see that overlap is just incredible. I'm actually thinking about something particular that I'd love to share if you'd like. I wrote a couple of poems about quilting, and I feel like it would be appropriate to share them. Do you think that would be okay if I shared them with you?
That would be great.
Okay. When I am feeling extra creative or when I'm having extra feelings, like when I'm feeling extra emotional, something that I really like to do is write poetry. And I feel like poetry is another very close love of mine in my creative life, to be able to write. I love writing and especially poetry. And so even though I don't like promote myself as a poet, as we're talking about how much we love quilting, I feel like maybe these two poems that I want to share with you will sum up how I'm feeling better than me just kind of like babbling on. So thank you for letting me share them. Okay. So this first one is called A Quilt Is ... A quilt is a love song that's stuck in your head. A quilt is a love note left on your bed. A quilt is a whisper that says you're enough. A quilt is a hug when you've had it rough. A quilt is an offering of non-returnable time. A quilt is a breeze through ancestral wind chime. A quilt is a row of ants, each one a stitch. A quilt makes a person incomparably rich. A quilt is a timestamp of love's devotion. A quilt is an embrace that spans ocean to ocean. A quilt is a snuggle of love passed to babe. A quilt is a bridge from the womb to the grave.
I love it. That's great.
Thank you. So that is one of them. And then the other one is called Creative Alchemy. The pieces of a quilt top are all my emotions, sorted and split and spliced just to reunite. Each a new addition in a complicated assortment until each piece feels just right. The thread is a roller coaster, a conglomeration of where I have been and where I've still yet to go. Each thread is meticulously guided in place, and when you see it, you just assume it's so. The batting is never seen, but incredibly felt. It is the words that can simply go unspoken. Each wave of warmth given through loft and drape is the real tongue that utters love's token. A quilt is much more than the sum of its parts. It's love manifested and set tangibly in place. It's a fragment of a heart, encouragement on a new journey, bound together with well wishes it's laced. A quilt is a conduit, transference of energy, and can carry significant power. It transforms material and skill through creative alchemy into adoration, hour by hour by hour. So when you're given a quilt, there's so much more than meets the eye. It's not just scraps and stitches in one single day. It will keep you warm while you laugh, love, grieve, and cry. A memento to comfort on your way.
You describe quilting so well through your poetry. That's wonderful.
Thanks. Thank you. I was hoping that it would illustrate a better picture than what I could just say by talking a million miles a minute like I normally do. I am including those poems in my new graffiti quilting book that's going to publish later this year. So those are the very last 2 pages of the book are those 2 poems. I'm grateful that you let me share them here. For me, it was kind of a return to my why, like, why do we do what we do? Why do we make quilts? And for me, those 2 poems were me trying to describe why I make quilts.
Definitely. Who do you make your quilts for?
To be honest, mostly myself. I'm kind of selfish in that way. I mean, over the course of the last 10 years or so, as I have been writing and pioneering graffiti quilting, so much of my portfolio has just been exactly that, my portfolio. So I think that now that my reserve of the quilts that I've made is getting quite large, I'll probably get to a place where maybe I'll give some away, maybe I'll list some for sale. But that being said, I do try really hard to prioritize making quilts for people in my life for special occasions. So like out of me and my 7 siblings, we would exchange gifts and we would rotate names of who we would have that year. And when we did that rotation, I took that as an opportunity to make sure that every one of my siblings and their families had a quilt for me. So that's kind of fun. And then I also like to just make quilts and keep them on hand, waiting for the appropriate time to give them away. And these are more like experiences of when people have had hardship or things like that in their life. Like I remember specifically making this quilt thinking, I have no idea why I'm making this. It didn't have any sort of like emotional connotation. It wasn't for anyone specific. It wasn't like I was trying to get deep with like my practice or anything. It was just like I threw it together and made it and thought, this is really beautiful. I'm happy with this, but like I have no specific purpose for it. So this has happened to me multiple times where I've made a quilt like that. And then I've had a very, very specific experience, like a specific spiritual experience where I have felt very strongly like, hey, that quilt that you made, that was for this person. And it's almost like it's revealed to me later, like who that quilt was supposed to be for. I just never know it at the time that I'm making it. It's more like later on, and I'm able to pull from that. And I really love that kind of concept too, because it's helped me to be more prepared, like in my life with relationships with people, that it's like, I didn't want to be like the person who would be like, oh yeah, you're pregnant. Okay, I'll make a quilt for your baby. And then the baby turns like 3 years old and they finally get the quilt because I finally finished it. I didn't want to have experiences like that where I was constantly feeling like guilty for not being productive when I committed to make a quilt. And so I do it backwards more now, where I make a quilt and then I say, okay, cosmic universe, my divine creator, when that quilt is supposed to be assigned to somebody, I know that you will tell me when that is, and I will be ready. And that really helps me a lot, because then I can have all the feel goods of like, oh my gosh, I was prepared. And now this quilt is for this person and it's going to impact them in this way. And I'm so grateful that I was prepared for it. The couple times that I'm thinking of specifically when that happened, I made the quilt long before the actual hardship happened. And then the minute that I found out, I knew exactly what quilt and I was able to act on it. And so that's kind of how I work mentally with the quilts that I have or who I give them to, or kind of things like that. Like I love to make a quilt for the sake of it being a quilt that exists and is functional, knowing that at some point in time, my soul is going to connect with another person's soul in that way, that I know exactly, like, here is a tangible piece of me to give to you so that you know that I'm thinking of you or that I'm here for you. So those have been some kind of cool experiences. So yeah, it's kind of a balance between quilts that I make and keep for myself as part of my artistic process or as a part of my portfolio. Then I have quilts that I make to illustrate something or to teach something. And then I know that I could part with them later and I sell them. Or there's also quilts that are kind of this reserve that's like, no, this is specific for someone or something. I just don't know it yet, but I'm going to still make the quilt until I find out what that thing is.
That's so neat that you have that all figured out.
I try. I mean, it's not a foolproof process, but it's working for me at least.
Yeah. Do you have a project you're working on right now?
Yes. My biggest project right now is started last summer and it's spanning for all of 2024. But 2024 marks the 10-year anniversary of when I wrote my first graffiti quilting book. And so this year, my huge project is that I am rewriting the book and expanding it. So the first copy was like 80 pages. And then the second one that I wrote in 2017 was about 90 pages. And now this one is clocking in at almost 340 pages. So it's quite a huge undertaking. But have you ever had that thought where you're like, man, that person is so cool in this one specific thing. I wish I could download their brain and just like have it in my brain. That's what this book is for me. So for anyone out there listening, if you look at my work and you're like, oh man, Karlee's the bomb, she's so amazing, then I would highly recommend that you check out my book when it comes out. It's the summer of 2024, because I am really pouring my heart and soul and my brain into this 10-year anniversary celebration of graffiti quilting.
Well, let's go ahead and talk about the book a little bit then. What is graffiti quilting and how did you come up with it?
Graffiti quilting is the act of taking all kinds of different quilting motifs and smashing them together all in one quilt. So graffiti quilting was kind of born out of rebellion. And then also it was more of like being transplanted into the quilting world. So graffiti quilting is based on the style of drawing that I had done for years and years throughout childhood and throughout my high school years. And when I got into quilting, I just started applying those designs that I was drawing in my sketchbook with fabric and thread. At first, it was just like, oh, okay, cool. Like I doodle in my sketchbook. Now I just doodle on fabric. And then it started to become more discernible and it just kind of started unfolding in front of me, or kind of falling out of my soul in a sense that like there was something really here that was more than just me doodling on fabric the same way I doodled in my sketchbooks. So the 3 quilts that I mentioned, my 3 favorite quilts, the second one that I mentioned is called Mini Graffiti Quilt. That's a really good example of kind of the timestamp of when graffiti quilting started. And that gives you a good idea for the aesthetic behind it. So graffiti quilting is a free motion quilting technique that you learn lots of different motifs in the process that can be used on their own. But then it's also a lesson in how to compose a unified quilt using all of the different quilting motifs that you know how to quilt.
And with as many pages as you say are in this book, there's a lot to choose from, evidently.
Yes, quite a bit. You know, like other areas that I've talked about, how things kind of unfold in front of me, graffiti quilting is no different. So like when I wrote the book in 2014, it was just me trying to conceptualize what I was doing, because I was doing it regardless of whether I could verbalize it or teach people how to do it. Doing it was always the first thing. It wasn't like I said, I want to write a book. And then as I write the book, I'll figure out how the technique happens. It was more like, I'm doing this technique and there's a rhyme and reason. Now I just need to like put vocabulary to it. And so when I wrote the first book in 2014, apparently it was enough vocabulary that people really gravitated towards it. And I was invited to do an international teaching tour of graffiti quilting in the summer of 2015. So I went to 2 places in Canada. I did England, Ireland, and Scotland. And then I also did a month-long teaching tour across the southern coast of Australia. And it was all because there were these quilters all over the world who were interested in this concept and wanted to learn more about it. So I published the book, I traveled and taught, and it was so interesting that the more I traveled and the more that I taught, the more that I interacted with my students and kind of started having these like sounding boards to bounce my technique off of, the more I was learning myself. Things kept unfolding and things kept kind of going down these like veins or these rabbit holes. And so in 2017, I was like, okay, this book is not comprehensive anymore because what I know about graffiti quilting has expanded further than what this book does. And so in 2017, I was like, I got to rewrite the book. I got to add more to it. There's more here that when people want to learn it, there's more that I could put in the book. And so in 2017, I did that. And again, I did another round of teaching internationally. I went to Norway. I did a bunch of locations across the United States. And then I also started teaching it online. Again, same thing happened. It was like, wow, there's even more, building more and more and more off of what I've already expanded the book to be. That was 2017. So we're looking at 5 or 6 years later now. And I was like, oh, wow, there's more. There's more here. Like it was calling to me. And it just kept saying like, Karlee, you have more in your brain than what this book has. This needs to be updated. And it's like one of those things that creatively, when you feel called, that's like something more needs to exist outside of your body. That's what this new book is. And it's just so interesting and enlightening that the more I work on the book, the more falls out of me. I've had this experience with poetry as well. I feel like with my creativity, it's kind of that way. Like I'll feel something bubbling inside of me until it'll overflow. And then it's like, I can't help but just get it out of me. And that's kind of what's happened with graffiti quilting. So this year, with it being the 10-year anniversary, I really wanted to make sure that I was pouring every last ounce of information that was in my brain into this book. Like I hope that when this book is printed, if I died, the graffiti quilting technique would live on forever because it's so comprehensive. And I feel really good about it. I hope I don't die. Like I would really like to keep going, but it's like one of those things that's just like, I have to do this while I am here on earth. Like this is something that needs to exist and can only exist through me. So yeah, I've been working on the new book and I should be getting a proof copy today, which is so exciting. I'll be able to see kind of how it looks printed and see the colors and that sort of thing. But I still am making the final edits on the book. So I'll order my first round of prints of the book probably in June. And then welcome packages for my online students, which are the people who get the book, will start shipping mid-July. So I don't know, it's exciting. And literally it's like, this is the only thing I'm focusing on this entire year. It's huge for me. So just trying to celebrate the decade of graffiti quilting and trying to continue to honor it and do it justice wherever and however I can.
And if we want to look for your book, where will we be able to find it?
So right now for the 10-year anniversary, you'll be able to get it in conjunction with my online class. And you can get all the information for that at karleeporter.com. So I could sit here and regurgitate it, but it's probably just easier if you go check it out and sign up because it's going to be a phenomenal class. I would say if you want to become a really, really great free motion quilter, this is absolutely the best class for you to do it.
Sounds good. Now let's jump back a minute. Can you share a quilting tip?
Don't quilt when you're hungry. Actually, I don't even know why. I just don't like quilting when I'm hungry. I feel like I can't focus when I'm hungry. I can't focus on anything when I'm hungry. So I would say just eat well. I don't know. Now it's hard to think of one off the top of my head. Okay, here's kind of a quilting tip that I kind of live by. Unless someone is paying you dollars, money, actual money to quilt for them, don't feel like you have to take anyone's advice. That's my quilting tip.
That's good.
I think it's good to take advice, but I don't think it's good to just swallow all advice from anywhere you get it. Even if it's like a professional like me and I give you advice, like still consider it and decide for yourself if it's the right thing for you. And I would say that for everybody. You are in charge of your own creative destiny. And so whether that includes people's advice or not is totally up to you. And I hope that that sounds liberating and not intimidating.
It does. That's good.
Good.
We might have gone over this already. Describe how you went from having quilting as a hobby to a business, but in a way you were working kind of in the quilting industry and it became your hobby.
Yeah, it was kind of like in tandem. Like there were definitely areas of learning about quilting that were very hobbyist, right? Like I've participated in quilting competitions, and that's like totally the hobby side for me. It's not a business side at all to compete in quilting competitions. But then also, as I was learning more about quilting in general, I started applying a lot of my design work to creating computerized quilting designs. And that was totally with a sense of business in mind to be able to sell my patterns to other quilters. So it kind of went hand in hand, like, oh, I learned how to use this software to make a digital design. And then a little bit later, it's like, oh, I have 10 or 15 digital designs. Maybe I can license them to a website that sells them. And then it was like, oh, wait, people actually like these. Maybe I should build my own website as well. So there were like those things in business that I was always kind of, I wouldn't say hyper aware, but definitely very aware of how my hobby and my income could be mutually beneficial.
Yep, that's a good way to put it. What is the name of your business and how did you come up with your name?
So I got my first name for my birthday and I got my last name from my lover. So I didn't really choose my name, but I did choose to use my name as my business name. So actually, really, it wasn't until I had to like legitimately register my business like with the government that I had to really decide what I was going to do for a name. And I wanted to go with my name because I didn't want to feel put in a box or limited by anything like some sort of describing characteristic or anything like that. I wanted to be able to use my one single business as a way to explore whatever artistic endeavors I wanted. So I didn't even want to be like Karlee Porter Quilter or Karlee Porter Sewing or Karlee Porter Quilt Patterns or anything like that, because if I wanted to make surface design, what if I want to design greeting cards or postcards or wallpaper? I didn't want to like pigeonhole myself in any way, even though I haven't ended up needing to do anything different because I'm still very much into quilting specifically. But I don't know. I think for me, there was more of an emotional drive as well to use my own name, because I don't know if it was just from being raised in a large family. So my maiden name is Hanson. And it was like, oh, you're a Hanson. You're one of the Hanson kids. Or like so many times in school, my teachers would say, oh, Marcy, oh, Roxy, oh, Shelly. And it was like, my name is Karlee. That's my older siblings. Like, stop calling me by their names. It was so frustrating to me to feel like I didn't have my own name, like that people didn't even take the time to actually learn my name. I was just like one of these Hanson kids. And so I think as an adult, maybe that was part of it. I think making a name for myself is important. And so it's like, if there is one place in my life where I'm allowed to be recognized solely by my name and let my reputation precede me with my work, because it's like, oh yeah, Karlee Porter, she could do this. Like maybe they're like, Karlee Porter, she's an amazing quilter. Karlee Porter, oh yeah, she's a poet. I remember her. Oh, Karlee Porter, she's a fine artist. Oh, Karlee Porter, she's amazing at grooming dogs. Like whatever it is, it's all just based on me as a human and being able to be recognized for that and feeling okay about that. I don't know, maybe I'm like totally sounding like a narcissist or an egomaniac or something, but that is why I chose to use my name as my business name.
It's great to stand out with our name, and it's wonderful to be known. Well, Karlee, as you mentioned, you've always considered yourself an artist. I wanted to hear the story about Mr. Palmer and you being in a classroom that you weren't assigned to.
Okay. So, like I said, I was raised in kind of an inner city area of town. I went to Ogden High School, and I don't know how I got away with skipping as many classes as I did and sneaking into the art room just to keep working on my art assignments. Maybe that's more of like commentary on like the public school system. I don't know. I don't care. I'm just happy that I graduated and got to do as much art as I wanted to do. I was kind of like the star art student to him. Like he and I had a very good relationship. I was constantly like sneaking into the back of his room and working on my projects. But also when I was there in class, I always took his work seriously. So it was really nice that I felt like he saw me as an artist and he really gave me a lot of space to explore and really express myself. He was always very open minded to that because he appreciated it and respected it too. Even after I graduated high school, I would periodically go back to the high school purely just to show him, like, hey, look at this book I published, or hey, look, I did an update and I brought you a copy, and we would kind of catch up and shoot the breeze. And he was very encouraging in a space where I think I didn't have a ton of adults around me giving me specialized attention and helping me kind of really grow myself creatively. And so he was just a very, very strong mentor in my life. And I'm forever eternally grateful for that. He is a good example to me of the type of adult that I hope I can be for aspiring artists who are in their adolescence, who don't necessarily have a clear sense of direction, but can be recognized for where they are and appreciated for the drive that they have and the taste that they have, even if their skills and their execution are not there yet. So I really appreciated that because Mr. Palmer just taught me how to be graceful towards other people who are aspiring. So that was really cool. And now that I am a teacher myself and I get to work with students who are in the beginning or early stages, well, really, I mean, I have students from all across the board, some who are very experienced and very skilled in quilting and looking to kind of elevate. And then I also have quilters who are kind of nervous to jump into free motion quilting. And as much as they want good education and instruction, they also want encouragement and a hand to hold. And I can do that. And Mr. Palmer was a really good example of that for me. So shout out to Mr. Palmer. He's the real MVP.
What a blessing to have him there at the school when you needed him.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Well, you've mentioned your online class. How did you feel when that first person signed up for one of your classes?
Oh my gosh, it was amazing. It was so cool. And, the thing that was really awesome about online classes is just like everybody else on the planet, we had no idea in 2017 that COVID was going to happen. And so when I started doing online classes in 2017, by the time COVID hit in 2020, I already had the infrastructure in place that we could keep having seamless classes online because they were already online. But honestly, I feel so incredibly grateful for my online class students as well as my in-person students. I fully realize and can honor the fact that there are many really, really great professional quilters and teachers in our industry. There's a lot of people to pick from. And so when someone chooses me to teach them, I do not take that lightly. And it's like a huge honor for me. yeah, so it felt good. It felt really good. And it's something that still feels good. And I'm so grateful for it. And I take it very seriously. And I really aim to please, especially with this upcoming class with the 10-year anniversary of graffiti quilting. I expanded the book, obviously, but then I also expanded the online class. So every time I teach online, it's like my classes get better and better. Like when I first was teaching online, I was just streaming from my cell phone onto the Facebook group and had one camera angle. And now, as we've gone through the process, my husband, who's a computer genius, has like, okay, maybe we can add more angles. And here's a streaming software that we can use and all of this stuff. And now my classes are so much more polished. And I've even expanded them from being 8 weeks, which is what they normally have been over the last few years. Now the class is 12 weeks long. So I'm constantly really pouring more and more into my classes for my online students because I take it so seriously to make sure that when they vote with their dollar, that we can really squeeze that dollar and get every last drop of what I can give them in exchange for their tuition, because it's more than just money. It's an investment in themselves. And I don't want them to ever feel like either they're not worth the investment of what they spend, or I don't want them to feel buyer's remorse. I don't want them to feel like they could have invested in themselves somewhere else and gotten a better payoff.
That's so important.
Yeah, definitely.
And 10 years ago, when you sold that first book, I bet that was a nervous time. Did you have to buy your books ahead of time, or did you go through a publisher that sold them for you, or how did that work, and how did you feel about all of it?
This is kind of such a crazy story. And I'll start off by saying, like, people say, like, God works in mysterious ways. I think that God works in very clear, deliberate ways. And it's about being able to see that deliberateness that I find a huge blessing. So, for instance, when I was on the cusp of wanting to write the first graffiti quilting book, it was also at a time in my life with my husband where we were considering moving to Kansas, which is so crazy. Kansas is not crazy. Like, no offense to Kansas. It's a beautiful place. But we were considering moving with my husband's job, which at the time was kind of tumultuous. So it was a crazy idea that we were even considering moving halfway across the country for a job that was a little bit shaky. So that was like kind of its own path that my husband and I need to figure out. But once we decided that that wasn't the right move for us, we started looking to buy a home because at the time we just lived in a basement apartment. And as we were looking at houses, we would like find a house that we liked. It would have been on the market for 30 to 40 days with no offers. And then like the day we would put in an offer, someone else would outbid us and the house would get taken. And we're like, what the heck? It wasn't even like a highly sought after home. Offers kept falling through and we were getting discouraged. And it was our first home. So there was extra anxiety of like trying to buy a house for the first time. And then finally we found a house that kind of the same idea happened where it had been on the market for a little bit with no bites. And we put in an offer. And instead of getting outbid, they just said, okay, we got 2 offers for the same price. So just come back with your best offer. And so we added as much as we could to our offer and made it our best. And they ended up accepting it. And that was incredible. So we move into this house and it's wonderful. And this is in a different neighborhood from where we previously lived. We didn't know any of the neighbors. When we went to church in this new congregation in this area, there was a woman there who is a very successful published author, and all of her work is self-published. So she's like a book publishing master and especially specializing in self-publishing. And so I had mentioned like, oh yeah, I wanted to publish a book. It was just incredible how being in the right place at the right time and being prepared, like the Roman philosopher Seneca says, luck is what happened when preparation meets opportunity. And it's like, if we call it that, I was so lucky to meet Kellyanne because she gave me the opportunity that I needed to pair with my preparation in order to be lucky, in order to be successful. And so she gave me a consultation and she helped me really get set on the right path so that I could self-publish my book. And the significant part of it is that my preparation was the fact that I knew how to format a book myself, which not a lot of people who want to write books know how to do. They typically have an idea and then they take it to a publisher, and the publisher says, sure, we'll publish it. And also we want 95% of the proceeds. And you kind of don't have a choice because you don't have the skills to do it yourself. But I had the skills to do it myself. So the most amazing thing about this is when I published Graffiti Quilting, because I had self-published, I was able to keep all of the rights to my book. And when I published it, I made 20 times more per book than if I had went with a traditional publisher, because I put in the sweat equity instead of the financial equity. And so I made enough money in the pre-sales of the first graffiti quilting book that I was able to buy a quilting machine and quit my job at Handy Quilter and run my business full time as a designer and as a teacher. And that was so incredible. So I guess that's the long answer to your short question. I self-published, and all of my books are self-published. It would take a very, very aggressive offer from a traditional publisher to convince me to work with a traditional publisher, because I've been very fortunate that I have been able to have the entire skill set needed from start to finish to publish a book successfully. And so I've just continued to do that. But that's also been kind of something in my bones that I grew up with, was kind of this go-getter, self-reliance type attitude. I try not to rely on people more than I need to. I mean, it's probably a trauma response a little bit too, but it has served me well in the sense that if there's something I want to make happen, it is not my default to expect other entities or other people to help me succeed. It's more like I do it, but then if I need background help as a secondary form of support, then that's wonderful. And like, that's kind of what Kellyanne was for me. She gave me all of the information I needed so that I could run. She gave me running shoes instead of me jumping on her back and her carrying me. She gave me a pair of running shoes and says, here's what you need to do. And then I went and did it. And it was so successful. And I'm forever, forever grateful for her for that, because I could have very easily just basically sold my idea to a traditional publisher, and I wouldn't have had the control over it that I do. I wouldn't have had the rights. I wouldn't have made the money to make my business sustainable so that I can explore these other things that I love so much and I want to contribute to the quilting community. It's just kind of a really cool full circle moment now, being at the 10-year anniversary of that experience, because it was preparation and opportunity that led up to that allowed me to be lucky, quote unquote, lucky.
So you were able to get pre-orders. Did that go smoothly? And how exciting was it when people started actually ordering the book from you?
Yeah, that was amazing, because at that point in time, I didn't even have my own website yet. I had just listed it on a third-party website. It was called Store Envy. I don't even know if it still exists, but it's kind of like an Etsy shop. Yeah, people just pre-ordered so quickly, and it was really cool. And the other thing that is such a huge luxury of self-publishing is that I printed on demand, which meant that I didn't have to purchase copies of the book until people had already ordered them. So I didn't have to, I mean, I would have, but I didn't have to like put up the financial risk of buying a pallet of books from overseas and then hoping that I can turn around and sell them all. It was like, okay, I've sold X amount of copies. I'll order that plus 10% so that I have some in stock, and they're already paid for because people have pre-ordered. And that was incredible. It was such an incredible feeling to feel like there was support before people could even read or peruse the book. There was support for it because they had seen my portfolio and seen what I was doing. And that was really, really cool. It's very much of an homage to graffiti in the sense as well. Like graffiti art, the reputation of the artist always precedes the artist. People hardly even know the identities of graffiti artists, but they know their work. And I felt like that was very similar to my story, because people would see my quilts and be like, wow, that's amazing. And then they would be like surprised to find out that I was only 23 years old when I published it. And it was almost like they were taken aback because they weren't expecting this young little know-nothing early 20s girl to produce such a high level of free motion quilting portfolio. So also kind of cool when it comes to graffiti because it's very, very similar to graffiti art, which is very near and dear to my heart as well.
Karlee, is there anything else about your business you wanted to share?
I love running a creative business. I love working in the quilting industry as much as I love playing in the quilting industry. So if you are a quilter, especially with free motion quilting or computerized quilting, I would love to be your friend. So you can always find information about me on karleeporter.com, or you can see I am pretty present on Instagram. So you can find me at Karlee Porter Design on Instagram. And if you need a quilting friend, you can always sit with me.
Great. And I wanted to share, Karlee is spelled Karlee.
Yes. And also, I should clarify, Porter is my married name. There was a rumor going around a few years back. It was kind of funny. And it was just like one of those like catty things where someone was like, oh, Karlee Porter, she's only even in the industry because she's related to Porter from Fawns and Porter. For the record, I'm totally not. I'm married into the Porter name. So thought I would clear up that confusion.
And your husband's not related to them either, right?
No relation. I would be honored if we were, but I am not a quilt industry Nepo baby.
That never entered my mind. Wow. I also wanted to remind us to go look at your episode page on A Quilter's Life, where I'll have a link to the Ira Glass YouTube that you mentioned.
Okay, perfect.
Karlee, thank you so much for sharing on A Quilter's Life. I loved hearing your story, and I wish you all the best on your book coming out.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I had a great time.
Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You can find more stories on aquilterslife.com or subscribe on your favorite podcast player so each episode will be downloaded automatically. Also, I want to hear about you and your wonderful quilts. Please contact me, Paula Chamberlain, through the website to set up an interview. And as always, thanks for listening.